Hi, I'm David Cornelius, and I'm happy to be part of DelphiCon 2021. In this session, I'm going to take you through creating a cross-platform REST client application from start to working prototype. There would be many more aspects of the application that we won't take time for in order for it to be a published application. We'll talk about some of those near the end of the coding session. We'll begin with just a couple of slides to set the stage with the bulk of the presentation in the code. Afterwards, I'll be available for some live Q&A. A little bit about me. I've worked with several different programming languages, but I've done most of my work with Pascal. I started in the 1980s with Turbo Pascal, used Borland Pascal for DOS-based apps, and started wading through the Windows programming with the OWL, or the Object Windows Library. But I was delighted when Delphi came out and have been an avid user of this programming tool ever since. I've used Free Pascal several years ago, in fact, to write a Linux web server, which is actually still in use today. I've also done a little with .NET using C# and BASIC, and even Oxygen, the Visual Studio Pascal plugin by RemObjects. But I keep coming back to Delphi as my tool of choice for developing a wide range of applications. When Delphi 1 came out in 1995, I met with several other programmers in the Portland, Oregon area to form what later became the Oregon Delphi User Group. In 2000, I became the coordinator, and we actually still meet almost every month. I'd like to give a shout out to my friends in ODUG who have continued to support this group. I recently finished a book called Fearless Cross-Platform Development with Delphi, and it is geared toward people like myself that may have many years invested in Windows application development, but perhaps have a little trepidation in climbing the learning curve to support other platforms, especially mobile devices. The book takes them on a step-by-step journey through the process and is available from Pact Publishing. There will be a discount code for attendees of this presentation at the end of the talk. Most recently, I was invited to join the Embarcadero MVP program, and I am honored to be a part of the worldwide group of programming professionals. Before we jump into the code, I just want to set the stage for the app we will build. Its emphasis is on low code, and long ago that implied prototyping and not much more. But with a rich set of components that encapsulate a lot of the functionality we used to have to code by hand, we can shorten the time to market and often expand a prototyped app in Delphi to a full-fledged production application. This means less development time and quicker realization of your product idea. I have a general rule of thumb. The less code I have to write, the less code I will have to debug later. By using a rich set of components and libraries, I can save myself time in maintenance, which lowers the cost of development. These concepts are recognized across the industry, and some predict that by 2024, 65% of application development will utilize low-code principles. But I must stress one point. This is not no code. We still need to account for differences in environments or user preferences, perform complex calculations or queries, handle exceptions elegantly, or simply use or format data in unique ways. You'll see a little of this in today's code. As mentioned, today's project will be REST client app that uses FireMonkey and works on Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS. We will show it working on Windows and Android. I'll first discuss the API we'll use in this demonstration and then build an app from scratch in Delphi 11 using standard components that can be found in the Professional edition of Delphi, and maybe even in the Community edition. Many REST APIs provide several REST method types besides the common GET method. These include put, post, and delete, to mention the most common. We'll only take time to demonstrate the GET method. Finally, the code for this project is on GitHub. The link will be shared at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, let's code. Before starting the Delphi project, we need to understand the API we're going to use. The one I've selected for today's demo is WordNick. I've created an account for myself, logged in, and gotten a free API key. They have a low usage plan that doesn't cost anything, which is perfect for our demonstration purposes. You can get definitions and examples and explore words in various ways. Let's look at the API real quick. So down at the bottom you can click API and it takes you to a developer section of WordNick. So then if you click on Docs, you can see there are two sections of the API calls. If you expand words, you can see that you can get a random word or a word of the day and some other things. The ones we're most interested in for today's demo is the word section. You can get like definitions, examples, and a few others that might be interesting to add at a later date. So let's drill into one of these and see how it's used. So let's say you want the definitions of a word, and let's say we'll enter the word chair, a very simple word. See what we get back. We enter the word, click try it out, and we can see the results listed below. Notice the scroll bar indicates there are several definitions, and as we scroll down, it looks like each one has a definition in the text field and an attribution or source for the definition. A lot of these come from the American Heritage Dictionary. As we scroll way down further, we can see that there's also one from the Century Dictionary. So there are multiple sources these definitions are pulled from. We can look at other APIs, such as examples. We'll use the same word, chair, leave the other parameters at their defaults, and click try it out. And we can see that this one also comes back with multiple entries in the response, showing different contexts in which the word chair can be used, like the chair of a committee or a piece of furniture. And once again, they have sources with links so that you can verify them. So this looks like a great little API to demonstrate connecting to and listing some data in our app. First, we want to try this out from our own tools and make sure my API key works as expected. So we'll use the Rest Debugger, and since I've done some tests already, there are multiple entries that are saved, and I can just recall one of those. I looked up the word hippopotamus, so let's reuse that and see what comes back. We click Send Request, and it comes back with some headers that lets me know how many calls I can make per hour or per minute based on my payment plan. But what we're most interested in is over on the Body tab, where the results of the request are shown. And here we can see we get the same type of information we found on the website, multiple definitions with their source. On the Parameters tab, we enter the API key and any other parameters the API may be required. We can also look at examples, and we send that request and we get back some examples as we expected, just like we saw on the website. So this will be something we can use in our program today. We're now ready to create a cross-platform app. So in Delphi, we start a multi-device application. We'll just choose the header-footer template. This will be a fairly simple app. Click OK. Then we'll create a new folder for this. Then we'll want to rename the project to something a little more meaningful. We also want to name the unit. And let's set the title as well. And while we're here, we'll set the name of the form as well to match the unit name. I'm going to be referring to names in code, and it improves readability over the default ones. So, since this is going to be used on various form factors like desktops and handhelds, we want to make the user interface rather fluid. So I'm going to use a flow layout. I'm going to put that up at the top, stretch it out a little bit. I'm going to be using the F6 key quite a bit, which is a hotkey to take me up to this little box where I can then just start typing in the components that I need to use. That saves some time. So the first thing we're going to want up there is a T-label. And we want this a little bit away from the borders so it looks a little nice. Its text is going to be enter a word. And then we're going to hit F6 again, and we're going to put in a t-edit. And let's make sure that, okay, we don't want the edit as part of a label, we want the edit as part of the flow. But we also want its margins to be 10 left and 10 top as well, so that it flows nicely and doesn't get in the way of anything else. Edit word lookup. One more thing in here. I'm going to put a button on here. And we're not going to worry about doing anything with the button. Now down here, we're going to list some definitions and some examples. So we're going to put a label there, and followed by a list view. We're going to have the results showing up in a list view. So the label's text is going to be, for the first one, it's going to be definitions. And let's just make that kind of a bold, and we also want these margins out just a little bit. All right, and let's make the bottom 5 as well. I want just a little bit of space around it. Let's view LV definitions, and then we can just copy these right down here, so that there we go. And then this one will be examples, and the name for this will be LV examples. All right, now this one probably, instead of a line top, will be a line bottom, and make that a little shorter, and then we can put this right above that. And then this one will probably align client, so that we can have an expanding area for definitions, but kind of a fixed area for the examples at the bottom. And then we're not going to put anything here. For a finished app, we'd either have toolbars or some graphic of some sort. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So now we've got kind of an interface ready. We're wanting to make a call to a REST server, give back some results in a REST component, and then parse out the JSON and then display it in here. Well, let's worry about all that in a data module instead of cluttering up the main form. So we're going to right click, and we're going to say add new. And since I have it in my pop-up menu here, I can just say click that, and this as a UDM WordNick API. And we want to name this as well so that it is consistent. If I can type. All right. So we've got a data module ready. But instead of manually placing all these components in here, we're going to use a little trick with the Rest Debugger. So we come in here, and we are going to go to the definitions and send request, and we get this back. And since that is the request with all its parameters we want, we're going to use this nice little button over here that says copy components. And so then it tells us that it's put these 3 components onto the clipboard for us. Well, that's pretty convenient. We can go over here and just paste, and then spread these out. We're going to name these nicely. because there's going to be others here in a little bit. Request word. Let's just do definitions. And this one will be response definitions. All right, so as you can see here, the client will have the base URL and not a whole lot else other than the default values. The REST request has our parameters, which is the API key, and then it has the resource. And what we can do here, we can just leave this here for now, but that's basically all set up ready to make our request to this WordNick API. When that request comes back, it puts it into this response, which is this one right here. So if let's just do that real quick. Execute. We get an OK response back, which is from the website or web server API. And if we look at the properties of this, we can see here now content shows 4K bytes. And if we look at this, we can see our JSON is there. So we know it's working at design time. That's really good. But now we have the tedious task of parsing all that JSON, except that there's a really nifty component called a response dataset adapter. And we're going to add to that a FD mem table. And I'll show you the magic that can happen here. So I like to name these things so I don't get confused about what is what. So with this, we hook up our response, and then we hook up a data set. And now when we execute this, that dataset adapter has transformed the JSON response into a memory table. And all we have to do, if we look at it, we can see all our definitions right here. It's all parsed out and put into a little dataset. That's really pretty slick. We can double click and say add all fields there, and that's all done for us. We don't have to parse that JSON after all. So now we can hook that up here. To do that, we're going to first use the unit. And then we right click on this and say bind visually. And we're going to have, since this is the first time we've looked at the Live Bindings Designer, there's going to be a bunch of stuff on here that we don't need. And we're going to hide a lot of those things so that they don't get in our way and confuse us. Here is our list view for definitions. And so we're going to, here's our table for definitions. We won't need this, so we can hide that. So we can synchronize our definitions from a table into our list view so that they are scrolling together. And as soon as we do that, it creates a bind source and replaces that. So we're actually working with a bind source. And scroll this down, and I like to rename the bind source as well because there's going to be a couple of them on here. Helps keep things organized. So now that they're synchronized, we need to decide what's going to display where. So the table has a text, which is, if you remember from looking at this in the Rest Debugger, the text was the actual definition. There's also a part of speech. For some words, there might be multiple parts of speech. So let's group these by the part of speech. And the way to do that with a list view is to take the part of speech and put it into the header text, and then our definition, which is the text, into the item text. All right. So if we go back over to here, re-execute this, come back over here, now that we've hooked it up, we can see our definition showing up already. Well, that's pretty slick. Some of those definitions are pretty long. So let's go into the toggle design mode, and we also want to outdent the part of speech. We won't need to see this. We can say that's visible off. We're going to indent this just a hair, and let's just make this italics. And we're also going to want to word wrap this. So now if we toggle design mode off, that looks a little bit better. So all the noun definitions are here, and if there were other types of definitions, they would show up a little further below. One other thing I think I want to do with this is the vertical line. Instead of centering it, let's put it near the top. All right, that looks good to me, at least for a quick prototype. So let's do the same thing with the examples. Now that we've got the definitions going, so we go back over here, and that was pretty slick how we did that with the Rest Debugger. So let's do that again, but do that with examples. And we're going to send request, and we've got this back. So we copy this out here, and they've been placed on there. And since the client part will be exactly the same, we don't need that, so I can delete that, because we can redirect the request from this to the other client, because they can both use the same client. The parameters or the resource will be a little bit different. Instead of definitions, we call examples, of course. So let's name this so that we aren't confused when we're looking at things. Request examples. And it's going to put its response into response examples. And before I hook up everything else, let's just do execute. And once again, it's going to be in this content. And there it is. So yes, we can add in here a response adapter and a FDMM table. Before I type these up, I want to just hook this up real quick and look at something, because we're actually going to change something here. So instead of table definitions, we're just going to use this unnamed table, and the response is going to be from our examples response. And we're going to execute this, say OK. Let's go look at our data set. There should be some parsed examples. Oh, wait a minute. We only have one field and one record, and it's all this JSON stuff. What happened? Well, let's go look back over here at the Rest Debugger, and let's compare the results. So let's go back to definitions, and we send this. And we notice that the first character of the result set from the definitions API is a square bracket, which means that each of these things in here are objects, and it's an array of JSON objects. Let's compare that with the examples API. We get this back, and we notice that the first character is a curly brace, which means the whole JSON response is one JSON object. And there is one element inside it, which is examples, and that is the array. So this array, this API, in my opinion, isn't really consistent, but we can get around that pretty easily. All we have to do is say that instead of the root element being the outer one, we're going to say that the root element is examples. And as soon as we do that, then all of a sudden now we've got our result set has now been parsed and turned into an array of objects, just like the other one. So we can do that similarly here by just saying examples, and we clear the response data, which clears the memory table. We re-execute, and then there we have our examples. But there's an easier way to do this. And so we're going to actually delete all of these and show how we could have done this initially from just the Rest Debugger. Let's go back and look at our definitions. And okay, we need to clear this root thing. And so it parses it out again for us. And if we go over to this third tab, the tabular data, we can see that it's parsed it out, and it's got, you know, the columns and rows. So if we came back here and did our examples, and we could see here, just like we saw when we did the edit data set, that it has one until we do examples. Now it's parsed it out correctly. If from this tab you copy components, it does those three. But if you do the copy components from here, notice that in addition to those three, it also has a response data set and the FDMEM table. So we didn't even have to manually place those on there. It's got them all ready for us. We can go here and hit Control V, and that's got them all out here for us. The table, the data set adapter, the response, the request, and of course we're going to just delete the clients because we only need one of those. So we're going to say request examples, and we're going to point that to our client. We're going to say rest or response examples, and this is already got our root element in here. You can specify it either here or in the dataset adapter. And this one is going to be named response DSA examples. And this is going to be named table examples. And our data, this is going to point to that. That's pointing to that. So it looks like it's all set up right. So if we execute this, let's go in here and make sure that we've got the data set that we're expecting. Those look like examples, which is great. We're going to add all the fields in here. And now we're ready to hook up our examples. So we can just do that similarly to what we did with the first one. And we won't need this. We're going to, as soon as we synchronize this, it replaces that with a source, a DB source. We'd like to name this something a little more in line with what we're working with here. And then for now, all we're going to do is just display the text of that, which means we can come back here, re-execute this, now that everything's hooked up, and we should see examples here. And once again, we can go to design mode, turn this off. We are not going to have header text, but we do want to make sure that it's word wrapped, and I like seeing the vertical line more at the top rather than at the bottom. And there we are. So all of the stuff is hooked up so that we can call an API, and whatever we get back is just immediately and automatically displayed in a couple list views without any code whatsoever. To actually get this working, if the API was designed so that this was like word.json definitions and then the word, we could probably use live bindings and just apply our text edit field to a resource suffix here in our request. We could put that right there, and then it would just automatically append it. But since it's the other way around, we have to stick it here in the middle. So it makes it, we have to add just a little bit of coding for that to work around with the API. To make it a little bit easier, we can put this in the suffix, and we can, we won't need a slash on the end of that. And the same here. And then we will create a procedure here And I'm going to just compile this once to make sure everything is all loaded, and we've got Android target, which would slow things down. So I'm going to switch this over. All right, so request definitions dot resource. Let's go grab this. Oops. Now we're going to append the lookup there. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing with our examples. And this one can actually just, it's going to be exactly the same as the other one. I could type. All right, so now we have our data module set up to accept a word, and it will call the API, returns the JSON response, parses it into a memory table. The memory table is hooked up through live bindings to a couple of list views. All we have to do is pass the word in that we're looking up. And so instead of attaching code directly to a button, we're going to create an action list. And once again, let's just name this something more intelligent. Create a quick action. And that way we can assign it later to a hotkey or a memory or a menu or a speed button instead of a regular button. Our action will be called act word lookup. And we'll just assign the text to be lookup. The action will simply be to call our data module, a new procedure, and then pass in the text property from our edit field, and that should be it. Oh, well, it'd be helpful if we actually hooked it up to the button. So we could click here, hook that up, it gets the assigned caption, and we are ready to test this out in Windows because that's faster. So let's look up the word, I don't know, fire. And we get an invalid date string. Okay, so this is something that I've also discovered. When you copy the components from the Rest Debugger, it looks at the data and it tries to make the best guess as to how to interpret it. And one of the things that I found is that there is, on this data set adapter, it uses a rich type of conversion. And I'm not really sure why, but I've noticed that if I switch this to string only, it works fine. So we're going to execute this again, run this again, try this again, and now it parses just fine. So if you're using that convenience thing, just remember that little trick. So now, this is working. We've entered, we've got an application working. We are able to type in a word, look it up, it calls the API, gets back both definitions and examples, parses them into a FireDAC table, and displays them in a couple of list views. And with extremely little code, we can now switch over to an Android and we can try this out. And I've got an Android hooked up. I'm using my finger on the Android to move it around so that you can see that it's a live streaming from my Android phone. It's a Pixel 3a. And as soon as that launches, you'll see it appear on my Android phone. All right. Well, you can see we need to straighten out that label. It looks a little ugly. But I'm going to use my finger on my phone, type in our same fire, and do a lookup. And oh, we get a clear text problem. Okay, so this is another little problem that is very easy to solve, but it's something to be aware of. Let's just break this. And both Android and iOS have increased their security as of actually several versions ago, and they want everything to be encrypted all the time, which is a really good idea. But they do allow exceptions. In order to allow exception for Android, you have to go modify the Android manifest file. And so we can pull that up in a little text file. And it's just an XML file. And you can look this up, but you just add a little line right in here that says, allow clear text, or I forget the exact syntax. But there's a better way to do this, and we're going to go modify the client base URL. WordNick does support SSL, so we can do that and rerun it. And what we're going to do, we need to re-execute these just so that the components are understanding of this. We're going to clean, and we're going to regenerate that Android project. And I've sped up the video just a little bit here to save you the tediousness of watching it compile and link. We type the word fire again. Click lookup. And we see that it has examples, but no definitions. Well, that's kind of strange. But let's look at something here. I mean, we've got the same API. We didn't change the code, apart from possibly headers in HTTP being sent differently. This should be returning exactly the same data. The API won't know what platform we're calling this from. But in that case, that isn't the problem. It actually took me a while to figure this out. The issue is in the word we're sending. We're sending the same base word, but notice in the Android, the word fire has a capital F. On Windows, it doesn't automatically uppercase anything. But the feature of, on Android, or maybe it's the feature of the virtual keyboard I'm using, the fire is uppercase. So if we did this, if we lowercase that, typed in fire, what do we get? There. Now we've got definitions and examples the same that we saw elsewhere. So there's a couple ways we could do this. We can instruct the user to disable their automatic uppercasing, or we could actually modify the text edit and set this char case to lower case, and then it won't automatically uppercase everything. But that may not be what we want. I talked with the WordNick API, and they gave me an example of the word polish, which in English means to make something shiny, like I'm going to polish the furniture. But it also, with an uppercase P, it's Polish, and it refers to a group of people from the land of Poland. So there's definite difference between the words. So they had to make this a case-sensitive API. And so that's something that you need to consider when you're working with various APIs and with various devices. So now that I've rerun this with that char case lower feature, I type in fire, and I don't have to specifically lowercase it. It's going to be lowercase anyway. So there we are. So now we have a working cross-platform app successfully accessing a REST API from two different devices using a single codebase. It needs some fine-tuning for sure, but it's a functioning prototype. We can now check other device forms and find that this is where placing components on the master form don't look quite as expected on other form factors. For example, we can modify our Android And notice that, yes, this is rather squished. So we pull this out a little bit, and we can rerun that. And we would, of course, do that for each of the form factors that are available to make sure it's going to look as good as it can on each of the devices that we intend to ship this on. We could also add a style book and make it look a little prettier with some custom colorizations. We could add a powered by WordNick logo at the bottom. We could add a word of the day or a random word. There's room up here for other buttons. And now you can see, as I've recompiled that and rerunning that on my Android, that this looks a lot better. We could also shorten the spacing here. We could probably put a bar between the definitions examples so we could adjust that up and down. There's lots of things you could do to make this a little bit more usable app. If you'd like to extend this app or take a closer look at how it's put together, you can clone or fork the project from my GitHub account. Just search GitHub for WordNick for Delphi. I've removed the embedded API key, of course, so to see it run on your system, you'll have to register for your own key, but it's a quick and simple sign-up process, and it's free. Several aspects of building apps for multiple platforms are covered in my new book, Fearless Cross-Platform Development with Delphi. This was just released last month, and like I mentioned, there's a discount code you can use when you purchase it from Pact Publishing. This code gets you a 25% discount and is valid until December 12, 2021. I should mention the book is available in both printed and ebook versions, although the printed version can only be shipped to the US, UK, India, and Australia. You can use the direct link shown on your screen, or just go to PactPub and search for Fearless Cross-Platform Development, and you'll find it right away. Thank you for your interest in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and above all, learned something you can apply right away in your own application development.